I just wanted to make sure it wasn't going. All right. Nice turnout. Okay. Well, welcome to the Old City Cemetery. My name is Juliana, and this is Eric, and we'll be taking you around and showing you some of the symbols here in the cemetery. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually divide everybody in half because we do have a large group and it makes it a little difficult to see things. So in a few minutes, Eric's going to just take everybody sort of in the back half, take you that way. I'm going to take the other half this way. We're going to meet in the back. And then I'll talk a little bit about mourning dress. And then we'll take the opposite group back the way we came. So if you were with me, you'd go with him. If you were with him, you'd go with me. So that way you don't have to look at my face the entire time. All right. So let's see. Or his face.
That's what I was working for.
Well, thank you. All right. So a couple of things, a little housekeeping. If you need the restrooms, they're back there. Once again, you probably don't want to use the porta potties in the back. Let's see. Please don't lean on the monuments or pull on them. I did do a kids tour a couple of weeks ago. A little girl pulled down one that was about that big, and it came down on her leg. She's okay, but they are very unstable, so please don't pull on them. So kids, make sure your parents don't do that. All right, if you want to get our email list, there's a, back in the back, Jean's holding up a clipboard. So if you want to get on the email list, basically tells you when we have more tours coming up. I have to keep this because I forget what to tell you guys. All right. Oh, and then you can take a look at our board to see what tours are going to be coming up. We do a free tour on the first Saturday of every month, starting in February and goes through November. Because in the winter time it's stormy and you don't want a tree falling on it. Let's see. And tours are free, but we do gladly accept donations. So there's a little Iron Ranger behind you with a really bright yellow sign that says donation. So if you enjoy the tour, the money goes to the restoration of the cemetery. We are volunteers. All right, so a little bit about the cemetery. It was started in 1849. The first 10 acres were given to the city by John Sutter. So it's a pretty old cemetery, hence the reason you shouldn't pull on the headstones. And let's see, it's 30.4 acres. The cemetery is. At one time it was about 80 acres. We sold off some of the land to the Masons in the back, and the Oddfellows passed them. So when you go toward the back, part of that is the Masons and then Oddfellows, so it's not all the city cemetery. I have to use my note cards or I forget what I'm telling you, and then I look at things and get sidetracked and distracted. So don't be too scared of the note cards. I promise not to read off of them. Just keeps me on track.
I make no such promise.
All right, so for the most part, they're family plots out here, so the family would buy the plot. And sometimes people ask, are there still burials out here? Yes, there are. Last I heard, there's about 20 a year. If you can prove that your family member, that you have a family plot here. There is also a state plot, so somebody was asking, could Jerry Brown be buried here? He actually could in the state plot. Not sure how that works, but I'm not sure that he'd want to be, but he could be.
So people pay for the plot.
The people?
The family pays for the plot, or it's already paid for?
The plot is owned by the family, so it's already been paid for, from what I understand. All that kind of goes through the city and how they work, the fees and everything, I'm not sure. I don't have anything to do with that part of it, but they do, if you can find a deed, which from not long ago maybe you can. So you could use death certificates and marriage certificates versus things like that. So that's what they do. There's also the Pioneer Cemetery, that's the Pioneer section, it's in the back, and that's the Pioneer Association that owns that. And I understand there's a way that if you're a member of the Pioneer Association, you can be buried there as well. So they do about 20 burials a year here, which sometimes surprises people. Let's see. I think that that might be it. Oh no! We got to talk about Victorian funeral stuff. All right. I'm really sort of laid back, and I have the attention span of a 4th grader, so I apologize in advance. That's why I have the note cards. Otherwise, I'll just be like, whoa. All right. So we're talking about the Victorian era. That's 1837 to 1901, when Queen Victoria was on the throne of England. In 1861, her husband, Prince Albert, passed away unexpectedly. He was sick. And so she threw the entire country of England, or the United Kingdom, into mourning. And it was this huge, this whole celebration of death. And it happened to coincide with the time of the Civil War. So we borrowed a lot of the customs. They were a little more formal over there than we were here. And how formal we were here in California, I'm not exactly sure. Put it down. So before the 1830s, people were buried in a churchyard. Then they had a problem with cholera in 1848, 1849 in England, and they decided that they should really start making things more sanitary, because they'd been burying people in the churchyards for hundreds of years. So they just bury them on top, or they pull the bones out. So they wanted to have these beautiful sprawling cemeteries. So that's when they started building the garden cemeteries like these. They wanted to have a place where you could go and honor your dead, and it was sort of like the first parks, really. Let's see here. Oh, that's when they started using the term cemetery. It comes from the Greek word sleeping chamber. So here at the Old City Cemetery, there was no segregation. Anyone could be buried here. Anyone of any creed, religious background, race, nationality, you could be buried here. But the symbols that we tend to talk about have a bit of, they tend to be more Christian in nature, so that's what we tend to use. And there's a disclaimer. The disclaimer is that symbols mean different things to different people, and sometimes they don't necessarily mean anything. They're just used for aesthetic value. So we'll tell you the common meanings that we've seen. And an example of somebody using something as just for aesthetic value is we have one of our volunteers here has a plot, a family plot, and so she's already purchased her headstone, so it's all ready to go, and she decided to put daffodils on it. Well, daffodils can mean a couple of different things. They can either, I always forget this, they can be rebirth or resurrection, or they can mean vanity and self-love. The reason that she put them on there, it's her favorite flower. So it doesn't necessarily have a symbolic meaning. All right, so now with all that, let's get moving, because I can't stand this long. All right, so if you want to go in the back, you do want to go in the back. All right, so Eric will go in the back and take about the back half. I'll take the other half, and then we'll meet in the middle. So this should be about an hour and 15. If you need to leave for any reason, feel free. It won't hurt my feelings. Okay, good. We got everybody in the shade. Cool. All right, so the first one I wanted to point out is a really common one, sadly, here in the cemetery. The lamb over there. It's not the best example, but you will see lambs throughout the cemetery. The lamb is a symbol for innocence and purity, and so you find it on the grave of a child. So unfortunately, there are a lot of lambs here. I always say it's the public service announcement portion of the tour, because a lot of the things that the kids died from, the diseases, are things that we get vaccines for now. So I always tell kids, hey, when you're getting that vaccination, that shot, and you're saying it hurts a lot, just, it's probably a pretty good thing that you're doing. So that's my public service announcement portion. Okay. Let's see. Also over there, let's go over there. Oops, sorry. I do this tour about once a year, and in between I always forget little things, so hence the note cards. But there are certain things that I talk about, like the lambs, I always tell kids about them, and doves, I talk about them a lot. So there's a dove over there on Neubauer. The dove is a symbol of either the soul or the Holy Spirit coming for the soul. Oftentimes it will have an olive branch in its mouth as a symbol of peace. So you'll see a lot of doves. So I'll be talking a bit about some of the animals that you'll see on graves, some of the plants. I'm not that great with flowers. I can never figure out what the flower is, but unless it's a rose or maybe a lily. And a little bit about some of the different things that sort of symbolize mourning. And Eric's going to talk a bit about the fraternal organizations, some of the religious symbols, and some things like that. So, I'll get that. And then there's a wreath here. Oh, thanks, Anita. All right, so there's a lot of wreaths that are used on headstones. They're laurel wreaths quite often. And laurel wreaths were used as for victory in ancient times, for people that were victorious in battle. So in this case, it's used to symbolize victory over death. So they're used quite often. And the outer part symbolizes the body or life, and the inner part symbolizes spirit, because it's sort of not solid. And if it's a circle, that symbolizes eternity, because there's no beginning and no end. All right, so let's go. Yes, I'll explain morning dress when we get down to the middle part. We all get back together. Oh, This is the rose garden. All right, so it's our historic rose garden, and there's about, 100 volunteers that work on it? Maybe more? They're historic roses, and Anita knows a lot more about them than I do because she's involved with it.
Mostly roses in the 19th century.
Find just a little more in the shade. You don't have to come in the sun. Okay, so you want to take a look at the urn up there and the drapery. There's a lot of those that get used in the Victorian era. They used them a lot. The urn could symbolize life because ashes were placed in there in ancient times. And the drapery could symbolize death. Also, sometimes it symbolized the veil between this life and the next. And sometimes it was put up there as for reverence. Sometimes it's kind of like the pall. And then sometimes it was put up there to make the deceased feel at home. So exact reasoning for exact people, not exactly sure. So let's see if I got all the things I wanted to tell you about. Oh, cremation. Sometimes people will ask, why would they use that if they didn't really cremate? They didn't start cremating again really until the 20th century. They were doing it in the Victorian era after the 1870s, but it was very unpopular. People just sort of had this idea that, they thought that at the end of the world, Jesus would come back. You would need your body. But then there was a theologian that said, well, if God can bring all your pieces back together after it's been eaten by worms and all that sort of thing, then he should be able to do it with ashes. So then it got a little bit more popular. So that's something I just learned the other day. Yes. To be honest, I don't exactly know. I know that they would use the pall as a black drapery. Yeah, it was a cloth over the casket that they would use. And I know they were draping pretty much everything. They would drape mirrors when someone died. They would drape their their paintings or anything like that. They would drape black over the door so people knew that the person had passed away in there. I don't know if it was just a sense of reverence. I need to look that up. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. It was a cloth. So it was a cloth that was placed over the casket or the coffin. And the term casket started being used about the same time the term cemetery started being used. And a casket is the rectangle. The coffin is what you think of as Halloween with the little shape, like the body shape. So just so you know, I'm not an expert. I just love this. I think it's really interesting, and every year I learn something else. But I certainly by no means am an expert. I just like to read about it, I like to learn about it, and I just like to talk about it. Yes, I'm going to talk about that too. But thank you.
In churches where they have a pall is at the front of the casket so that you don't know whether it's a rich person or a poor person, so that there's equality in death.
Oh, I've never heard that. See? And every year someone will ask a question. Like last year they were asking about embalming. When did they start doing embalming? And luckily I had a guy who was in the funeral business. And I looked at him and went, I don't know. And he said Civil War. And I've since learned more about that soldiers would die, obviously far away from home. Families would want them to be there so they would be embalmed. And by the end of the war, they'd been embalmed. The government paid for it. And they embalmed somewhere between 30 and 40,000 people. So this is something new. I'm going to go look up more information about the pall. It's always something new to learn. That's why I love doing this. All right, so I'll show you this too. This is a zinc monument. It was called white bronze because that sounds nicer. It was put up it was made by the Detroit Bronze Company, which was sort of a part of the Monumental Bronze Company out of Bridgeport, Connecticut. And one of the other tour guides was telling me that these were kind of considered cheap, like the Walmart of headstones. And people thought they were just going to fall apart and they were going to get wrecked, so even some cemeteries didn't want to have them. But it turns out that they do really, really well. And they do better than a lot of the stone monuments. And the main way that they get ruined is through vandalism. But they don't rust. So it's quite interesting. They would use marble. Big marble boom here in California in the 1850s. Before that, you had to get marble from Italy or Vermont. So that's why I just learned this actually this week about marble. I always wondered, why do they use so much marble when it tends not to weather very well. And I found out there was a huge marble boom. There were all kinds of quarries around here. There were a few near Columbia, if you know where that is, in the foothills. So, and then a little later on, they started using granite. I understand it was because they started to, the manufacture of it was cheaper, the way that they could do it, and it was more cost effective. So it looks like maybe the 1870s or so they started doing that. And if you see the marble monuments, take a look on the right-hand bottom corner, and you might see the signature of the stonecutter, the stonemason that did it. It's quite lovely. And the marble, most of our marble, if not all of it, is hand carved. It's gorgeous. All right.